when you solve problems for a living, it is actually working, because that mindless sort of just distant ambling that you let your brain do will actually give you an answer. And I think this is, like, if we want to broaden out a little bit further, I think one of the problems people have is they just don't sit and stare out the window and let their brain search for the solution. Start with the end in mind. Where do you want to be? What version of you do you want to see in 5, 10 or 20 years' time? All right, now begin to break that down into little bits. All right, how do I get there? You know, I don't care how many drugs you take. I don't think you're going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger in a month, or compete in a pentathlon, or swim the English Channel. I don't think the world works that way. But it is this ever compressed desire to be successful now without actually sitting there going, okay, here's my plan for tomorrow, here's my plan for next week, next month, next year, next decade. Everything has a plan. And without the plan, it all just goes pear-shaped, because you simply don't know what you're doing. So everything has a plan, and all successful people have plans. Here's a little quiz for you. Download our trading plan template and actually see if you can fill it in. See if you've actually got all the little bits and pieces that make up a trading plan.
Welcome to the Get Invested podcast, where we share great conversations with experts from all walks of life to uncover their secret know-how on where they invest their time, their skills and their money, and the benefits that this has created. You see, the truth is that everyone invests. Every minute of every day, we're investing our time, our skills, our energy and our money in something. Some of us are investing consciously, some unconsciously, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, and sometimes for no impact. Get Invested will help you to start living by design, not by default. I'm going to help you to make it happen, not let it happen. You'll hear the top tips on how you can live with conscious intent so that you can live more, work less, and leave a living legacy by investing now. Listen to the show to discover the top tips on how to get started, make the most of your investment journey, and ultimately to be living your dream, not someone else's. More episodes can be found on iTunes or at bushymartin.com.au/get invested. Thanks for listening, and now let's get invested.
Hi, freedom fighters. Now's a good time to rush out and buy some shares, right? The market's just dropped through the floor, and there's some great buys, right? I'll race out and buy some Qantas shares because they're way down on what they were, so I can't go wrong, right? This is exactly what a number of people have been asking me in recent times, mostly from people who've never or rarely invested. And my answer to these three questions is always the same. Wrong, wrong, wrong. You'd have more chance of picking the winner in the Melbourne Cup than being successful with this knee-jerk, instant, greed-driven approach. Remember the old adage that wealth is the transfer of money from the impatient to the patient. The reality is, these are the worst possible reasons to be buying shares or investing in anything. E.g., because they look cheap compared to what they were, and everyone's suddenly talking about it. Be fearful when others are being greedy. What's missing here are two crucial steps. Taking the time to really think it through, and then secondly, developing a proper investment plan. Let's start with thinking. When was the last time you allowed yourself the time and the space to just sit and think? Now, I don't mean worry, because we all do a lot of that. I mean taking the time out, without disruption, and just pausing to reflect and stare off into space, so you have time to really think and allow your creative juices to flow, so that you have the room for considered solutions to formulate to your answers to your challenges. My bet is rarely, if ever, unless you've been faced with a life-changing crisis, and then probably only fleetingly. Many of us are caught in doing so much that we don't have time to stop, we don't take a productive break, and we don't take time to think. We spend the best hours of our days engaged, distracted, and reacting to a whole bunch of things that barely move the needle, as if busyness is some sort of indication of success. Or is it more a distraction so we don't take the time to think, because it might be just a little bit too scary to confront what we might come up with? Finding time to think, and I mean really think, about just about anything is hard to do. And increasingly today, the first thing people do when faced with a moment of downtime is to reach for their smartphone or the remote control. But the state of our minds determines everything. The examples of countless successful people demonstrate that it pays to make time to pause, to reflect, to refresh, and to start over. Let me assure you that taking time to think is an absolute priority if you want to be increasingly efficient, solve problems better, and to improve your lives. Essayist Tim Creeder recently wrote in the New York Times that the space and quiet that idleness provides is a necessary condition for standing back from life and seeing it whole, for making unexpected connections, and waiting for the wild lightning strikes of inspiration. It is paradoxically necessary to getting any work done. How many times have you woken in the middle of the night with a great idea? Or come up with genius solutions in the shower? Now, why does this happen? It happens because our brains are free from all the usual day-to-day clutter and have a chance to form and develop ideas. Thinking involves slowing down and actually soaking in a problem. And your creative brain thrives in this time-out mode. As Michael Simmons mused on his Accelerated Intelligence blog, one question that's intrigued me for my entire adult life is, what causes some people to become world-class leaders, performers and change makers, while most others plateau? Now, I've explored the answer to this question by reading thousands of biographies and books across dozens of disciplines over the years. And I've noticed a consistent, deep, counterintuitive practice of top performers, and it's often overlooked. Despite having way more responsibility than everyone else, top performers in all worlds of endeavour find time to step away from their urgent work. They slow down and invest in activities that have a long-term payoff in greater knowledge, creativity and energy. As a result, they may achieve less in the early stages, but drastically more over the course of their lives. This equates to compound time because, like compound interest, a regular investment in thinking time yields surprisingly large returns over the long time. All great creators and innovators make time to rest, get a break and think. One of my heroes, Leonardo da Vinci, had a bed in his studio, and when patrons accused him of wasting time, he'd say, "If I don't do this, you don't get the work." And today, many widely admired business leaders, investors like Elon Musk, Oprah Winfrey, Bill Gates, and Mark Zuckerberg all set aside at least an hour a day or 5 hours a week over their entire career for activities that could be classified as a deliberate thinking, learning, and creating. It's often referred to as the 5-hour rule: dedicated daily reflection and thinking time. LinkedIn CEO Jeff Weiner schedules 2 hours of thinking time every day. Brian Scudamore, the founder of the $250 million company OTE Brands, spend 10 hours a week just thinking. And the person I admire most for his dedication to thinking and contemplating is the world's most successful living investor, Warren Buffett. He recently said that I insist on a lot of time being spent almost every day to just sit and think. I read and think. So I do more reading and thinking and make less impulse decisions than most people in business. I do it because I like this kind of life. And Buffett's business partner, Charlie Munger, once told a reporter that neither Warren nor I is smart enough to make decisions with no time to think. We make actual decisions very rapidly, but that's because we've spent so much time preparing ourselves by quietly sitting and reading and thinking. By his own estimate, Buffett has spent 80% of his entire career reading and thinking. He reads to get the facts, and then he thinks. Now, this is the opposite of most people who are overwhelmed with short-term deadlines, meetings and minutiae. The most successful people in the world spend a lot of their time thinking and reflecting. Now, I can hear you dismissing this and saying, yeah, well, he can do that because he's Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world. I could never do that. Now, this throwaway response may let you off the hook, but it won't help you long term. To achieve something different, you need to do something different. And here's the surprising reality. Buffett has spent most of his time reading and thinking since he was in primary school. Having more money or managing large companies doesn't magically give you free time. Having free time is never the default. People don't just fall into huge blocks of free time unless they retire. Creating time to think is a result of a deliberate plan and a deliberate strategy. It's the result of looking at time differently. Now, you might think that the greatest investor of all time stays on top of the latest technologies in order to create more time to think. But interestingly, the opposite is true. He's never had a computer in his office, and he doesn't have a smartphone. Now, these unusual decisions tell us that Buffett, firstly, is very clear on what data he needs to know in order to make an investment, and he's not interested in distracting or busying himself with anything else. And secondly, he's confident enough in his thinking, and he's comfortable to not follow the herd and do what's popular. He's clearly a contrarian. Warren Buffett's free time to read and think isn't just a fluke. He's designed his life around it. His lifetime optimizes for insight over coordination and input. He's not a manager or a maker, but a thinking lifestyler. Throughout Buffett's career, he's only made a handful of investments every year. Describing his approach using a baseball analogy, he says that the trick to investing is just to sit there and watch pitch after pitch go by and just wait for the one right in your sweet spot. And if people are yelling, "Swing, you bum," ignore them. As a result, there have been multi-year periods where Buffett has made zero investments. Now just think about how difficult it will be to wake up every day for years and not invest if you were a professional investor. Buffett and the thinker's lifestyle converts time into value in a completely different way than the typical approach to work. This is what's created one of the world's most successful business records in history. He's made a lot of time to think. He appreciates that thinking and learning, not just doing, are key to his long-term success. Now, we're living in a very unique time. Insight is the key to solving more and more problems, and the dividends on insight are increasing because we live in an increasingly global, digital, technological, and complex world. In a world where artificial intelligence is automating more and more of our work, we need to unleash our creativity. Creativity is not unleashed by working more, but by working less. In a world where everyone is speeding up and cramming their schedule to get ahead, we need to consider doing the opposite. Slow down, work less, learn more, and think long term. So what about you? How much time do you devote to just thinking? Do you feel guilty when you just sit there and daydream? Do you feel you constantly need to be doing something? Or that there just isn't enough time to stop and think? You can't do your best work while moving from one jam-packed day to the next. Life is lived at such a pace that thinking, and that's quality intentional thinking, just doesn't happen. Like an artist creating an oil painting, you need to take a few steps back from the canvas of your life to assess all of your activities and accomplishments, like the individual brushstrokes of your life, and take a wider, more holistic perspective. To get started, follow the 5-hour rule. For an hour a day, invest in compounding thinking time. Stare out the window for an hour, take an afternoon nana nap, enjoy a walk, read a book. You may doubt yourself, feel guilty, or even worry that you're wasting your time, but you're not. Step away from your to-do list just for an hour initially and invest in your future. This approach has worked for the world's greatest minds, and it can work for you too. Proven performers take time to reflect during the day. This enables them to relax, rehearse, and refocus. Reflection supplies an arsenal of ideas and solutions to the right problems. The best decisions, insights, ideas and outcomes result when we take sufficient time to think and reflect. And the end result of creating dedicated, unbounded thinking time and the insights and solutions that flow from it is that you come up with plans on how to identify and eliminate problems and grow successful solutions. This enables you to come up with a plan and then rapidly assess whether it'll work. You can then move fast because you're doing less. So what have you learnt from our recent bout of global radical uncertainty? And what are you going to do differently about this moving forward? Have you taken time to really think about it? What will be your future plan of attack? So my next obvious question is, do you have an investment plan? I'm not talking about a whimsical, reactive, opportunity gut feel. I'm talking about a well-considered and fully documented investment plan. If you're sick of struggling with inconsistent investment results, but you want to be a heavy hitter, then you need to develop a trading or an investment plan. Write it down and invest with it consistently. This tool is your secret weapon when it comes to investing with confidence and clarity. Every successful investor knows this. And now the team at Know-How in the trading game are joining forces to give you the opportunity to implement the closely guarded secrets of this incredible tool. To vastly improve your investment results, today's guest is generously giving you free access to their proven leading-edge trading plan template. And to get you motivated, I'm going to reward you with a challenge. Just download the plan template from tradinggame.com.au, that's tradinggame.com.au, by registering for their free trading pack, or just email me here at bushy@knowhowproperty.com.au. Then just fill it in and email it back to me, and I'll gift you a free copy of my book, Get Invested. And the best trading plan submitted will also earn guest appearances here on this podcast. Let me stress at this point that I receive no financial benefit for suggesting the Trading Game or any other company. I'm very careful about who I outsource my reputation to, and I mention them purely on the strength of my personal experience and the proven quality of their services. Now, the trading plan template is one of the key contributors to the enduring success of today's special guest, Chris Tate, along with his business partner, Louise Bedford. And like Warren Buffett, Chris is an inveterate thinker and planner. He's an investment trading veteran of over 35 years and one of the first people to ever release a share trading book in Australia. He has had an extraordinary impact on thousands of traders, including yours truly. As the best-selling author of The Art of Trading and The Art of Options Trading in Australia, his brutally honest and often irreverent approach, together with his meticulous pursuit of excellence, ensure that exceptional traders all around the world regularly quote his market comments. Chris has seen all types of markets, traded practically every instrument available, and shown others how to profit from every market condition. He's in constant demand for his keynote speaking skills due to the outrageous success of his presentations for every major trading exchange in the country. Chris has the proven skills to help you to increase the probability of radically jump-starting your returns. Now, unlike most other trainers who teach theory and what should be, Chris is one of the few people who truly understands what does and what doesn't work in the share market. So, if you've been thinking about investing in the equities markets, or you're seriously after a gigantic financial breakthrough in your share trading results, you need to listen carefully to absolutely everything that Chris has to say. And you'll get to hear him more often here now on Get Invested as he joins us to give us regular market updates. So please enjoy this very engaging and highly entertaining discussion with the infamous Chris Tate. Welcome back, Freedom Fighters. Now, when I first started my own passive-aggressive investment journey well over 20 years ago now, I read every single book on investing I could get my hands on. And one of my early finds was The Art of Trading, which really opened my eyes to a rational, logical, systematic approach to investing that has shaped all of my investing decisions from that time on. And since then, I've had an immense respect for the author of that foundational tome, Chris Tate, And today, I'm very humbled to have him join us here to share his words of wisdom. So let's get invested. Chris, how are you, mate?
Well, it's very kind of you. I'd actually like to thank you for the $2 you've contributed to my retirement fund for buying my book and not being a slacker and getting it from the library, for which I get nothing.
Yeah, I know that feeling, mate. I've authored and published a book since myself, and the number of people that come to me who've picked it up at the library, it's almost telling me that we think your book might be okay, but we're not sure we really want to spend any money on it yet.
Yeah, we just don't want to lash out $19.95 to buy it, so...
Mate, I am very humbled to have you on board and had immense respect for you virtually, because you wouldn't have known it until today. But, mate, for those who don't know you, can you start by telling us who you are, what you do, and why you do it, mate?
Alrighty. Let's start with basics. I'm Christopher Tate. I'm one of the founders of a company called The Trading Gun. It is a trading mentoring and trading company, which I've been doing in conjunction with my business partner, Louise Bedford, for the past, oh dear God, 20-odd years, as she dragged me out of a very comfortable retirement, which is a story for a later date. And I do it simply because it provides me with the freedom and lifestyle that some of my previous professions, and in fact my academic training, were never going to provide me with.
Yeah, spot on. The lifestyle is the key exercise, I think, mate. So let's delve into some of that history then, because already there's a couple of points of interest there. Can you take us back as far back as you'd like to go, mate? We're talking potentially school, if that's appropriate, and sort of take us through where you invested your time, your energy, and money. Where did it get you to? What did you learn from it, and how has that sort of led you back to where you are and what you're doing now?
I think if we were to look at it, I think what happens with everybody's narrative is that when you look back, it looks as if it's some sort of logically planned out trajectory. It's a little bit like when you read these sort of pulp magazine articles on, let's say, a movie star. It generally goes along the lines of, went to school here, had an interest in drama, studied drama at university, studied drama under this person, had a few off-Broadway roles, now I'm a superstar. And it appears to be that wonderfully linear trajectory, and people go, well, that doesn't sound very hard, does it? I actually started a very, very, very long way away from where I am. My academic training is in the field of immunology. The life I had envisaged for myself was as a research immunologist.
Okay, can I go ask you what attracted you into that field at the time, mate? That's a very specific area and quite a topical one, given the times we're in, obviously. What was the interest there?
Look, I think there's a few things. One is I found it profoundly interesting at university. It's just one of those topics. And it was a new and emerging topic at the time. Whilst we think that, medicine has a deep and rich history regarding all aspects of the human body, things like immunology are fairly recent. They are a construct of the latter part of last century. Yeah. And so it was new, it was exciting. I started my research career at the time. The AIDS epidemic was exploding. So that was very interesting. Yeah. And it came about simply because as someone who is an asthmatic and who has food allergies...
Yeah, you and me both.
You know all about how extraordinarily powerful the human immune system can be when it's turned on itself, let alone when it's turned on something else. So it really... my interest in it really just grew out of that. And it went from there. Now, unfortunately, academia is, well, it's certainly not as well paid as trading.
That goes for most things, mate.
It does. Look, if somebody said to me, if the genie appeared out of the bottle and said, what would you like to do? Given any manner of circumstances you could construct, I'd say that's quite simple. I'd like to simply go back and work on problems, because that's what I spend a lot of my day doing now anyway. but I don't want a drop in income or lifestyle. And the unfortunate thing about academia is politics, students, no money. And I actually believe that sometimes life has pivot moments, things you look at, and they actually nudge the way your life is going. And I'd been giving a tute to a bunch of first years who seemed to get thicker and thicker every year. And I was walking across the uni quadrangle, and I actually bumped into someone I'd done first year with, and who I hadn't seen since first year. And I said, well, what the hell have you been doing? And he said, oh, look, it just wasn't for me. I dropped out, did economics and commerce. And I went, oh, really? Shit, that must have been dull. And he said, look, yeah, it was, but. And I thought, yeah, there's always a but, isn't there? What's the but? And he said, well, I've just come back from a year in New York, and I'm just about to head off to London for a year for the bank I work for. And I said, okay, how much do they pay you? And he told me, and it was about 6.5 times what I was earning. And it dawned on me that I was actually smarter than him when we were in high school and smarter than him when we were at university. And I couldn't work out why he was making so much damn money. And then it dawned on me that there are two worlds, I think. There is the world of research and moving things forward, and then there is the world of commercialisation. And the world of commercialisation will always be more profitable. And so I eventually began to do some consulting work for emerging biotech firms that seemed to pop up by the dozens in the early 80s. Mm. And at the time I was investing and trading my own account, and I had the worst thing happen that could ever possibly happen. I bought a dodgy gold miner out of Western Australia, and the price went up something like tenfold. And I thought I was a genius. And I thought, well, I then made a second error. And this one proved to be not catastrophic, but problematic. In that I thought, who knows about trading? And in my naive idiocy, I thought, well, surely stockbrokers do. And so through sort of conniving, cajoling, and showing them actually how a scientific calculator worked, I talked my way into a broking firm, and it didn't take me long to realise that brokers had no freaking idea what they were talking about. And what gave it away for me was that the bloke sitting opposite me had sold carpets up until 2 weeks beforehand, and the bloke across the way from me sold shoes. That was the extent of their experience, and I thought...
Pretty handy crap. When you're on your knees, though, mate, because you've just lost someone's money for them.
Yeah. And I thought, oh, crap, this is bad, isn't it? And so I persisted with broking, and I actually used it as a training ground.
Mate, can I jump in there? Because there's a piece that I'd love to delve into, because what I'm picking up already is that even while you were doing the research side of it and shifting into the consulting arena, you were doing your own trading. When did you first get into trading? And even let's go back before that in your thinking in terms of when did you have the light bulb moment that I need to invest beyond my wage packet?
Yeah. I think we can even go back a little bit further.
Great.
In that I went to a private school here in Melbourne, but I went on scholarship, which meant that I was the archetypal poor kid surrounded by people with more money than God. And it was one of those things where you look at what, and whilst you don't want to drop things to material sort of base level. When you're a teenager, that's what you do, because that's your currency. Because, puberty's hard enough as it is. But so you latch on to some form of comparison. And teenagers always make comparisons among themselves. That's just their hierarchical response to life. It's what we did, and we all did. And it was simply looking at things going, what the hell? And actually, someone I knew, their father was an anaesthetist, and he drove a 911 Targa. And I've always been a Porsche fan.
Yeah.
And I thought, I've really got to get me one of those. And again, it's that clash between what you think or want to do versus what will actually get you what you want. And so academics are really poorly paid. It was a matter of looking around going, well, we were just beginning, sort of the beginnings of the 1980s bull market in late 1982. And some of the people I had known in my social group were involved in finance. And it sort of grew out of there. I believe that the market was a problem you could solve, that it was some sort of quantitative endeavour, that if you just got the answer, then how hard could it be? And the money would just print itself. Your rule one doesn't work that way.
Good start, though. Good way to think. What I'm hearing, mate, is that your desire to want to solve big problems is a bit of a driver for you. Is that something that just sort of innately is in you, or came out of your background, or I love. I have a constant argument with my wife in that when my office door is shut, you don't come in. And you don't come in probably because I'm either doing something like this or I'm staring out the window thinking about how to solve a problem. And she unfortunately thinks that staring out of the window is not actually working. When you solve problems for a living, it is actually working, because that mindless sort of just distant ambling that you let your brain do will actually give you an answer. And I think this is, like, if we want to broaden out a little bit further, I think one of the problems people have is they just don't sit and stare out the window and let their brain search for the solution. And I think if they do let their brain search for the solution, there is something in that makes them recoil against that solution. There's pushback in some way, shape or form. What is that, mate? Let's dive in there, because, I mean, if you look at yourself and you look at the likes of Einstein and Warren Buffett, every one of you is talking about that sitting and thinking and meditating and allowing the space is one of the keys that's allowed you to do what you do.
Yeah, and look, to be honest, and this is going to sound blunt and a little bit harsh, I don't think some people have sufficient connection with themselves to actually understand what we're talking about. But I think there's a large number of people out there who do, but for some reason, sort of the echo they get back is lost or is squashed, or they go through that thought process of, well, I couldn't possibly do that because I have to do this and I have to do this or I have to do that. And they're caught up in this cultural sort of morass of thinking. My background, my father grew up in the north of England during the Depression. And so his approach to life was that, you know, where he came from, everybody left school at 12 and went down pit. You know, they went down the mines,
yeah,
because that's just what you did. And so his thinking was very cloistered around that. And he was mortified when I left academia and took a completely different path, because it was so outside his field of view or his field of vision that he simply couldn't see it. And he never, from that point in time, he never understood what I did. And I think that catches a lot of people. A lot of Australians are children of first-generation migrants. And so they have the work ethic and cultural ethic that their parents brought with them. That the way ahead is get an education, get a good job, buy your first house, pay your house off. Well, perhaps as a start, that might be a foundational step. But as this sort of, as an extension, as a move forward, it's very cloistered. It's not going to get you where you want to be. in any way, shape or form. And it doesn't matter what your vehicle is. It doesn't matter whether your vehicle's real estate, business, shares, whatever. If you've got that closed mind, then you're stuffed.
Yeah, but mind you, it's so culturally indoctrinated that you're almost seen as a leper at the party if you're not doing. I'm very similar myself, Chris. Came from a hard-working Aussie country family, and there was no time for sitting around. If you're not doing, then there's something wrong with you. So how did you break through that, though? Because it takes a fair bit of courage to buck that trend and swim against the tide. And let's link it back to that jump from academic, because you're doing the expected thing. You've gone to uni. You've become a research scientist effectively, diving into immunology. You see your mates driving around in the Porsches, and you go, I want a piece of that. Jumping off that cliff, given your parents' reaction to it, and probably others as well, what gave you the mental courage to do it, and talk us through your thinking and what you're feeling at the time?
I think it's one of those things. Part of my upbringing has made me somewhat robust in that I really don't give a shit what you think. I just don't. If I can use an example from my past, I used to compete in full contact martial arts, and which is a wonderful outlet. But my style and approach of sort of my ring craft was based around the fact that you just can't hit me hard enough to knock me down. You just can't. You physically can't do it. And so I really don't care. I'm very much a walk forward kind of person. Yeah. And I don't know whether you can imbue that in someone. My view of myself is, and only people of a certain age will understand that, sort of old buggers like you and I, when we were kids, there used to be these clowns you would blow up that had sand in the bottom.
Yes.
And you'd punch them and they'd bounce back. And it didn't matter how hard you hit the little bugger, it wouldn't stay down. It just kept coming back. And my vision or my sort of self-image has always been that. When psychologists ask you what's your imagery of yourself, what's your sort of archetype that you see for yourself, I simply go blow up clown, and people stare at you like you're some sort of idiot until you actually explain the thinking behind it. And I think it's important that everybody have some form of metaphor like that or imagery that they have about themselves. And it's also, it's not a serious image. It's a clown.
Yeah. But
it's a clown you can't knock down.
Yes.
And so long as it's got air in it, it just keeps coming back.
The old romper stomper or whatever it was at the time, and mate, it's taking me back to, mate.
Yes.
Let's pivot back to that point where, because again, this is a pivotal moment for most people if they even take the journey, and the recognition that being a scientist was never going to get you there, but perhaps trading would be. Why trading? So I guess you've answered that already in terms of there were some mates that were in the broking space. You thought, I'll have a crack at that. So that led you down that path. Once you got into it and you realised that stockbrokers aren't quite or what you thought they were going to be, when did you physically start investing yourself rather than investing for others? I'm interested in that decision because a lot of people will either stick it in cash or they'll stick it in property or they'll start trading the markets. Why did you go down that path?
It's simply because there's a few things to unpack. For sort of poor academics and people who've done a bit of work on the side in industry, markets gave me, because of the low capital base, an ability to get started, an ability to get going. And that's all I needed, was that simple start. Yeah. And that in some ways is the advantage of equities markets.
Yeah.
you can start with smaller amounts. I mean, what's the median house price at present? It's
in Melbourne, it's you're not getting any change ahead of $700,000.
No, so and you've got to stump up 20% of that.
Yeah,
and so that's a big ask for young people, and it markets themselves gave me the opportunity to get started, and once I got started, I actually realised I could do it. After a lot of setbacks, a lot of toing, froing, again we're back to the clown analogy, being put on my ass and getting back up. Because again, you have to avoid that defaulting to the notion that it's a linear narrative, that people's lives start in one point and they head in a straight line to another. That's not how they go at all, and it's particularly not with mine. And there were some particular times trading my own account where I thought, got to pay the rent next week. I'm not entirely certain how that's going to work out. Because that's the life of the young trader. Now let me rephrase that. That's the life of the embryonic sort of. I'll use the generic term business person. Yeah. Someone who is investing for themselves, and it happens irrespective of people who are investing in a cafe they want to start, a restaurant, whether they're starting in property. I would imagine most people, and having watched this in friends of mine who are doing their first property development, there are moments when they go, "Oh dear God, what now?" And so it's par for the course. And I think a lot of what is talked about in this sphere actually glosses over that, and it's very much along the lines of, start doing this. I did that, went really well, everything's cool, without actually touching on, somewhat of the battering you get along the way.
Yeah,
and you do get touched up quite a bit.
My word, and I often say I reckon I've made every investment mistake you could possibly make because I thought I knew it all, didn't trust anyone else, and was going to reinvent the wheel, and found out very quickly that the wheel had been designed centuries ago, and all I had to do was follow the system. But yes. Talk to us about that, because that resilience, a lot of people in shares and in property as well, They'll get a knock, they'll lose some dough, they throw their hands up in the air, they walk away and never do it again. What was the difference with yourself that said, okay, well, yeah, I've had a knock, but I'm going to keep going?
I think it's just the way some people are. Some people are just resilient. Like I got somehow, and I blame LinkedIn, my old school found me and sent me their school magazine. And I looked at some of the things they were doing, and schools nowadays offer some extraordinary range of activities. And I looked at some of them, like they do Pilates and yoga and positive psychology, which are all good things, but they also had resilience training. And my view was, I went to an all-boys school in the 70s and I survived, therefore I'm resilient. Is there anything else we need to talk about?
Yeah, that's pretty much sums it up. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, are you happy to share with us some of the challenges you had in that early trading exercise? Think back to some specifics so that people can sort of understand what you had to go through.
It's one of those things where you make every single mistake under the sun. I would make money and then it would disappear. And it took me ages of sitting there chronicling what I did and was doing that was screwing it up. And eventually you get to the conclusion that investing and life in general is not a functional endeavour. It's actually a psychological endeavour. It's an emotional endeavour. I've sat with people on dealing desks who, and we're talking about now the early days of quantitative trading, and we're talking about people who are exceptionally intelligent. They would have masters or PhDs in a branch of mathematics or physics or econometrics, very, very, very competent people in quantitative terms. And I would say, we're doing this now. And they would go, I can't. And I go, why not? And they go, well, I just can't. Because I think or I feel And this notion that all you need is the right tool it's only half the story, because you've then got to learn to apply the tool. It's just the way it is. All high-performance endeavours are psychological in nature. I'll give you an example from my dim, dark past. I used to have someone on one of my teams with me when I used to compete, and he was actually from the same club as me. He would win club championships at his level, at his weight division. He would win regionals. He would win state quite easily. But because he fought in a certain weight division, he had to be that weight. We always got to nationals where he was going to dominate, and he always came in overweight. He had the tools but not the psychology. Something was tripping him up from taking that next step for success. So he always struggled at nationals because he'd be overweight. What do fighters do when they're overweight? Well, first thing is you throw up, which is just a brilliant thing to do before you've got a series of fights that day. Then you put the sweatsuit on and you start running around the block and skipping. Well, that's also really, really brilliant when you've got a series of fights that day. You know, if they were next week, that's fine. You've got a week to recover. That can be worked out. But what was tripping him up was his psychology. He had all the tools, he had all the moves, he had everything. If you watched him in the club, you'd go, shit, you're a handful. And he was. But put him at that environment and his psychology let him down, because he had this capacity to, and this I see all the time, to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And he was almost there, and then he'd fall over because of his psychology. And unfortunately, I actually think this is an endemic thing within Australians. We revere the underdog. We revere failure. It's a different mindset to that which the Americans have. Now, admittedly, their mindset creates issues, and it is very, very toxic, particularly at present. But what is the most sacred day on the Australian calendar? What's Anzac Day? What does Anzac Day celebrate? It celebrates us getting our asses kicked at Gallipoli. What's the best thing about Turkey? We actually managed to sneak off the beach at night. The people who should celebrate Gallipoli are the Turks, because the Turks did something that neither the Japanese nor the Germans could do in the Second World War. They held out a seaborne invasion from a superpower. Yeah. And they did it on a very ramshackle basis. But so it's part of this ingrained psychology that I think catches Australians and trips us up. You see it with our complete peanut politicians. They're all desperately vying to be the underdog. You see, let's take Malcolm Turnbull as an example, worth about, $400-500 million, desperately trying to present himself as the ordinary man down at Bunnings having a sausage sizzle. You live in a $25 million house and you're worth $500 million. You're not ordinary by any stretch of the imagination. But we have this thing about being ordinary, about, I don't like to talk about the tall poppy syndrome, but it seems to be a default setting. And I think that eats into our psychology. And I'm not certain where it comes from, whether it comes from convict past, our isolation, the cultural cringe we have, or whatever it is, don't know.
Well, let's talk about that, because it's a subject I'd love to delve into a little bit, because I've always felt that the difference between success and otherwise is often what's in our head. How? Let's talk about your situation. How have you overcome yourself and got out of the road of yourself to be a successful trader? And the second part of that question is, what would you suggest others do? Let's talk about people who haven't really done a lot of investment yet, but are thinking about it. How do they prevent themselves from shipwrecking themselves?
I think it's one of those things where, let's talk practicalities. Start with the end in mind. Where do you want to be? What version of you do you want to see in 5, 10 or 20 years' time? All right, now begin to break that down into little bits. All right, how do I get there? So let's put the big dream to one side, because we know what that is. let's now break down the steps and the paths. What do I need to learn? Where do I need to position myself? How do I need to take advantage of the luck that presents itself to me? Because one of the things that I find about Australia is I don't like to use the term lucky, but quick quiz, where would you have rather been the past 2 months? Italy or Australia?
Yeah.
I think it would be here. And I think that is a much wider, there is a much wider scope to that, in that this is a good country to be in to get a start. Granted, luck plays a part, and it plays a part for everybody, but you need to understand that absolute success and relative success are different. Absolute success, like Jeff Bezos starting Amazon, is luck. If he hadn't done it, someone else would have come along very shortly behind him and done it as well. Same with Microsoft and Bill Gates. His fortune hung on one lucky deal, and he had the good sense to run with that. But relative success, that is the success of you versus your peers, is not luck, because you're all starting from the same base, the same starting point. Again, when I got my school magazine, I looked at what people were doing, and I looked at the past few years, what people are doing. And whilst you don't want to diminish certain professions or the way people do things, the one that struck me was so-and-so was a tow truck driver. And I thought, geez, I bet your parents are glad they dropped $500,000 on your education, because you've been given luck. You've been presented with an opportunity that says, here is your opportunity. What are you going to do with it as a person? But we come back to that thing again of it's back to the individual. And there does seem to be something about people who do well. It's not innate intelligence. It is in part drive. It is in part recognising the luck that is bestowed upon them and making the best of it. So it seems to be a cornucopia of bits and pieces all wound up together. When you add them all together, you get a person who has a place they want to be, and off they go. And so it's hard to unpack if there's a single thing.
Well, let's pivot on that point and talk about your own personal end game, mate, because you're probably living it, and you've probably been living it for a long time. What did the bouncy clown 30 odd years ago or more? What vision did you have in your head that led you down the path? What did that look like?
Oh, Porsche driving wanker.
and are you actually now a Porsche driving wanker?
Look, I've actually had to sell the last one simply because for the first time in a long time I don't have stupid cars in the garage. Simply because, 2 years ago I herniated L3, 4 and 5 in my back. And so getting in and out of them was just pointless. I would go to the pool in the morning and it would take me 5 minutes to get out of the damn thing and do my rehab session, come back. And then if some peanut had parked too close to me, it'd take me 15 minutes of extraordinary yoga trying to get in the damn thing. And once I was in, it'd take me 10 minutes to recover from that, then drive home, repeat process. So now I'm tootling around in a truck, which is kind of good, but kind of not.
But let's delve into a little bit of the detail around the specifics of what you do in the investment arena, because there's 1,000 different tracks,
yes.
And there's a language all of its own that a lot of people don't get their head around. But if you were to sort of break it down into generically what you do in your trading world, what does that look like for the average person?
Yeah, I think you and I share similar pain points, that we can't actually stand people who try to make things sound important and difficult in an attempt to make themselves sound important. The thing I learned very, 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 very early on in presenting dissertations and taking apart dissertations was that when you had someone who spoke like that, they didn't know what they were talking about, and they were, their ego was defensive, and they were attempting to hide that they didn't know what they're talking about. And I see this all the time in my field. I can summarise trading really, really quite simply in that when I was asked to write The Art of Trading so long ago, the publisher said, "Can you write a book on trading?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, that's easy, not a problem. I only really know three things. If the market's going up over the time frame you trade, you buy it. If the market's going down over the time frame you trade, you sell it. And you don't bet the farm." And their response was, "Well, that probably won't fit 250 pages. And I thought, oh, padding? Trading is a simple endeavour. And no, let me use an analogy. Weight loss is a simple endeavour because it is an energy balance equation. If you are burning more energy than you take in, you will lose weight. You can't defeat that. So all this nonsense you see on Facebook and all the rubbish about I can't lose weight, I've got some metabolic disorder, blah, 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 it's all bullshit. You just eat too much. It's simple.
Yeah.
Because as I rather crudely like to point out, there were no fat blokes in Changi. So, but it's not easy because there's a range of sort of, let's call them psychosocial issues that get in the way. And there are undoubtedly. And they need to be dealt with before you can move on to the notion of it being an energy balance equation. Trading is the same. Trading is remarkably simple, but it's not easy. And it's not easy because we get in the way. I have a metaphor for markets. I believe that markets are exceptionally generous. They will tell me everything I need to know, and then they will present me with infinite opportunities to enact what they've told me. I just have to do what they've asked me to do. The problem is people get in the way of themselves. It's just the way of people. I can't do that because I think, I feel, I believe, I've heard. No, push that all to one side and do what the system tells you to do. And one of the difficulties people have with markets is that they are uncertain. But this uncertainty gives you the opportunity to profit. I would posit, I have a philosophical view. When I ask people how much their house is worth and they give me a figure, I say, well, no, it's not. Your house is actually worth zero at this moment in time. And they can't understand why. And then I explain to them it's worth zero because nobody's offered you any money for it. I mean, you might get a rates notice off the council, but the council's not going to buy your house off you. So every investment property in the world, to my mind, is worth zero. And people freak out when they start to think about that because it introduces an uncertainty that property investment's not meant to have. But all investing has uncertainty. And it has to have uncertainty because if there's no uncertainty, there is no risk. If there's no risk, there's no profit. I can give you a riskless trade. It's called the bank account. Well, I don't get anything, but you don't deserve anything because you're not taking any risk. And so trading is really, really simple. When things trend up, you buy them. When they trend down, you sell them. You manage the risk so that no one single trade will put you on the bones of your ass.
Yeah, I love that, mate. That's a really good way of summing it up. And you're right, no risk, no reward, mate. Let's paint a little bit of a brief scenario because I'm sort of interested in your thoughts on what someone's approach should be. And when I say approach, I'm not talking about stock picking. I'm not talking about styles. I'm talking about generically where they should go. And because I was in this position myself. In the 90s, and hence the reason for reading your book. But if you were talking to a time poor professional who's got a good career and he's earning a good income, and let's say he's got 50 grand up his sleeve, and he's wanting to build some wealth outside of his regular day job, What sort of approach would you suggest he takes, and what would be the first steps that would be the important ones?
There's probably a few things to unpack there. The most important is the point you made about time poor. One of the things about investing is that there are various mechanisms under which you can undertake it. For example, I had a conversation many years ago with someone who I was talking to, and I said, well, what's your rationale and reasoning for trading? Because we all need a reason. And he said, well, what I want to do is to eventually build a lifestyle where I can spend more time with my family. And I said, well, that's quite reasonable. That's a perfectly valid thing to want to achieve. And I said, well, how are you going to get there? And he said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to intraday trade currencies using 1-minute charts. And I thought, okay, you don't seem to think that there is a mismatch between aims and mechanism, given that foreign exchange markets trade in our evening and overnight. And this is the thing, you've got to match the approach to the individual and what they're capable of doing in terms of sort of the rest of their life. What is constraining them in terms of what they do? For example, through our mentor program, we've had several doctors come through, and they're very much in sort of what we've been talking about, in that their profession remunerates them exceptionally well, but it gives them no time at all, and it burns them out. And so they're looking for a mechanism post what they're doing, or a mechanism to wind back what they're doing. And many are initially attracted to very short-term trading. And I say, well, okay, that's really, really good. How are you going to take the trade when you've got somebody's head open? And you can't duck out for 10 minutes because you're the person on the spot. I mean, I don't think you can nip out, quickly and pick up your phone, because that's not going to work. So what you must do is build a mechanism that reflects what you're capable of doing. And one of the good things about trading is that you can actually do that. There is no set rule that says you must trade this way to be successful. And that's a myth. And it's a myth that has permeated my industry. And over the past probably 10 years or so, 15 years or so, we've had a whole bunch of wankers wandering around going, if you don't trade FX, you'll never be successful. Oh, bullshit. I mean, Warren Buffett's never bought an FX contract in his life. Would you like to give him a call and just point out to him what a loser he is?
I absolutely love that, mate. And you're right, that there's a lot of people selling the Holy Grail, but it's such dynamic, both from a market perspective, an opportunity perspective, and the piece that you've mentioned repeatedly today is that the person that resides between the ears. And if you don't match those up, then you're headed for disaster. 100% agree.
And it's quite easy for busy people to build a system that says, right, what I'm going to do is I will build a mechanistic approach. I'll get a really, really cheap piece of software. I will code some ideas into it, and I will run that on a Sunday evening. And it will take me, the entire process will take me no more than an hour. And on Monday, or sometime during the week when I get time, I will place my trades, because using the time frame I'm using, they're not time critical. You're not trading a time critical index trade or a commodity trade using a very short-term time frame. You're simply saying to yourself, well, I have recognised in this vehicle that it is trending up over the long term. I want to participate in that. Therefore, during the week, I will buy it. And you've simply crafted a methodology or an approach that matches the way you see the world. Back in the good old days when we were younger, when you used to watch tennis players, they all played differently. Some played serve and volley, some played from the baseline. Some hit two hands off one side, some hit two hands off both wings. There was a remarkable diversity. Nowadays they're boring and robotic and all the same. But they had crafted their game to suit themselves, and that's what very good athletes do. What a very good athlete or business person or academic, whatever, does is it says, what are my strengths? Screw my weaknesses because I can outsource those. What are my strengths and what can I build on? And so if you're a time-poor professional, well, you're time-poor because you're very busy with a profession. Your strength is your profession. Don't undermine that, which a lot of people seem to want to do. They want to cut their sort of... They want to remove the strongest part of their arsenal for some particular reason, which I don't understand. No, continue to work with your strengths and we'll work out a way how to fix this other minor problem. Don't cut your nose off to spite your face.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is, it's spot on. That's a good analogy because you're right. How many of us, and I was like this actually, Chris, as an effing architect, as I often refer to myself as, you get to a point when you're so busy that the reason you got into the profession isn't so shiny anymore, and the grass always looks greener on the other side, and you suddenly want to be someone else. And what'll inevitably happen, they'll either give up on themselves and stay there doing the same and nothing changes, or they'll throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is what I did, and not necessarily for the right reasons. What's your thoughts around that?
Oh, look, I think that's true. And we've all known people who you look at and go, you're doing well, and when you talk to them, they'd actually like to be somebody else. But I actually think that's part of the human condition. Again, what you said, the grass is always greener. And, for example, I have a friend who I went to school with, former fighter pilot, pilot with the Roulettes, Air Force instructor, airline pilot. Like, he's just had one of those careers. And as a fighter pilot, it's one of those things that every young boy looks at and goes, God damn, that looks cool. He'd want to be someone else. I think, what the hell for? Admittedly, being an airline pilot at present sucks because you're not doing much piloting, but people have this thing that they look at other people's lives and I don't think they see the lumps and bumps and warts. And I think this is part of the problem that social media has amplified in that what it does is people present their most perfect version of themselves that is carefully crafted. For example, my business partner and I, Louise Bedford, were, before COVID-19 hit, having our usual once-a-week breakfast catch-up on a Wednesday. And we were sitting there and there was two young girls sitting not far from us. And for an hour and a half, one of them took photographs of herself pretending to eat, and then got her friend to take photos of her pretending to eat. Now, I know exactly what she's going to do. She's going to go home, carefully edit and Photoshop them, and put them on whatever social media platform she uses with the tag, I'll just snap this one off having a quick brekkie. No bullshit. You've spent an hour and a half carefully crafting this, and no matter how many hours in post-production. So spare us all the palaver that goes round it and admit that what you're trying to do is craft a falsehood for people to be envious of. And unfortunately, people fall for that, and particularly young people. They don't actually see through the imagery and go, well, that's bullshit to start with. And social media amplifies this wanting to be someone else.
I 100% agree, and I just sort of extending onto that subject, I'd love your thoughts on this because I guess one of my concerns at the moment is that wonderful iPhone that we all rely on has absolutely destroyed most of our resilience, persistence, patience, and discipline muscles because we can have it right here, right now. We can make it look good. Therefore, subconsciously, we expect everything to happen instantly, whereas you and I both know that sustainable success is a long-term journey. What do you say to people where they come in with that expectation of instant, overnight everything to if you're going to get there, that you're going to go in for the long haul? What's your comments and thoughts around that?
It's a grind. And I think what happens, irrespective of the vehicle you use or the approach, whatever, people think it's like winning Tatslotto, in that you go to sleep one morning and you wake up the next morning and you're fabulously wealthy and all your wishes have come true. They don't actually see that it's a grind, that you actually grind it out day after day after day. And the grind does actually get you down. I really don't care what anyone says. Irrespective of your position in life, what you do, whatever, sooner or later you'll go, God damn, this is really, really getting on my quince. And you'll have moments where you're short with people, you're short with yourself, and you really just want to have a tantrum and chuck it all in. You've just got to accept that it's a grind. And the unfortunate thing is that wherever people go, they're presented with ever-contracting timeframes for success, in that if, for example, my gym started off with 14-week programs. We then went to 12. We then went to 10. We then went to 8. We're now down to 6. And the last one I saw was a month. Well, I don't care how many drugs you take. I don't think you're going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger in a month, or compete in a pentathlon or swim in the English Channel. I don't think the world works that way. But it is this ever compressed desire to be successful now without actually sitting there going, okay, here's my plan for tomorrow, here's my plan for next week, next month, next year, next decade. When I was involved in broking, I used to deal with the Japanese, and they're a fascinating bunch of budgies. And one of the things that fascinated me the most about them was long-term planning for, the firm I worked for, was what pub were we going to go to Friday night. But we couldn't possibly make that decision until Wednesday, because that was really just long-term planning and needed a committee to do. Their view was that their diaries were intergenerational for their businesses, so that their diaries didn't end at the end of the year. They went for 5, 10, 15 and 20 years. It's a completely different mindset.
So how do we break through that, mate? Because it's, as you and I know, and this is the other thing that frustrates me, is that you'll sit down and you'll take someone on that journey, and I love the pathway that you take them through, because it's exactly the way we do the same. It's, where do you want to end up down the track? What's your capability now? Let's have a look at you as a person in terms of your personality and your aversion to risk, and then let's look at a vehicle that's going to be the best one with the time you've got available to make that happen. The issue I see a lot of is that someone will say, yeah, okay, well, it's a 20-year plan, or it's a 25-year plan, or it's a 15-year plan, but then 2 or 3 years in, the world's falling in according to the mainstream media, and they'll make knee-jerk decisions based on that fear that is just streaming through our TV sets and the radio and every other media mechanism you get your hands on, and they make short-term reactive decisions on a 20-year plan. What do you say to people when you see that happen, mate?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that we actually have a fundamental conflict in biology, in that a lot of our makeup is built all around short-term constructs, short-term ideas, and they're ideas and things that have served us very, very, very well. It got humans off the tundra and into cities. And so we have a lot of this as we're sort of programmed to be a certain way, and it's difficult to overcome that base programming. And it comes back to, I think, what we were talking about when we first started chatting about the fact that you've actually got to sit down and look at yourself, and you've actually got to be honest with regards to the mistakes you make and the idiot decisions you do, and try and work out why. But that again requires this notion of sitting and being quiet. And people can't sit and be quiet. And not only that, I think a lot of people lack sort of the introspective nature that's required for success. Now, that's not to say you need to go and plant your ass in a cave in Tibet for 7 years on a cold stone and think about things. But it is, you've got to understand why you do things. Why did I behave in that way? Why did I react that way? This is one of the things I learned. I worked my way through university as a bouncer, which is a fascinating profession. No, I won't call it a profession. That's perhaps overstating it probably. But it was a fascinating Friday and Saturday night in that I would watch the same people when I worked at the same venues come in and behave the same way every weekend and get the same outcome. And the outcome was generally that one of the giant Maori bouncers, who was built like an Easter Island statue, would lob their backside down the stairs. And they were surprised that this happened. But they simply lacked the ability to look at their behaviour and say, okay, I did this, therefore that had these consequences. All right, why don't I not do that and see what happens? And I think what happens with people is that when we come to the investment sphere, when people jump at shadows, a lot like they're doing now with the unfortunate events of COVID-19, is that we're addicted to narrative. We're addicted to stories. And the more impulsive and emotive the story, the more of an impact it has upon us. And one of the hardest things I find to convince people of is that if you listen to the news and you listen to the business news, you will never be successful in any sphere at all. Because in part what you're getting is breathless hyperbole. At best you're getting a post-dictive explanation of things that people don't really understand. Most of the time you're just getting crap. And it's crap designed to elicit an emotional response from you.
Fear or greed, yeah, 100%. I mean, let's be honest. The fight or flight and the fear or greed drivers that sell newspapers, sell media, they become very, very good at that. And with the all-pervasive nature of that now, we're even more attuned to it. And if you overlay that with our instantaneous everything approach to life, you've got a very dangerous recipe on your hands.
And the human limbic system is hardwired to fire for threats. And we construct this anxiety around events that might not be reflective of reality in some way, shape or form. To use a personal story, and again to come across as a bit of a Porsche driving wanker, I'm having a renovation done out the back. We started as COVID-19 erupted. And I was chatting to the builders and said, "You've got much work on?" They said, "You're it." I mean, hang on, that's pretty bad. And they went, yes, because everybody all of a sudden, despite having the money available and the plans available and good to go, all panicked instantly and stopped all work. Well, as we've seen, despite the horrors of COVID-19, the world has continued to turn on its axis. And it will continue to be turning on its axis this time next year when we look back and go, shit, we dodged a bullet there. Oh, crap, I could have had my new backyard by now. Oh, what did I do that for? And it's simply because of that reactive threat-based response that we have. And this is particularly true in what I do, because the information flow is constant. People are constantly being bombarded. And now that we've got, chat forums, social media, Twitter, God knows what else, that people regard as academic journals, that makes it so much worse. And it's also amplified by the fact that much of what you read on social media, at least in my sphere, regarding how well people are doing, is largely bullshit. It's just people making things up.
Yeah.
To use an analogy, when I used to be heavily involved in powerlifting, we used to have, you'd have forums where people would discuss things, and you would always have a 14-year-old come on and go, deadlifted 600 kilograms today. No, I don't think so, mate, because that's well beyond the world record. Oh, yeah, I did. And it happens in trading, it happens in property. I had the misfortune to see one of Murdoch's papers this morning, and it was supposedly about some music teacher earning $4 a week who now has $700 million in property. Really? Hang on. Maths is a long time behind me, but let me work that out. I don't think so.
That stuff's scary, mate. Tell me, sort of talking about the relevancy of our times and sort of circling around this uncertainty piece again. I'm sure you're getting a lot of this because I've certainly got a lot of this in recent times. I'm getting people reaching out to me, and I'm no trading guru by any stretch of the imagination. I know a bit more about property, but I'm still getting a lot of people ringing and say, Bushy, should I be buying shares? The Qantas is down. I reckon I'll race out and get some Qantas shares. And what about Virgin? And I just shake my head when I hear that, mate. When you get those sort of questions, which undoubtedly you will be, what's your response to them?
I think my response is fairly simplistic in that this is, whilst the fact that a global pandemic has triggered a collapse in markets is a new one, we've had collapses in markets forever. And so we have a history guide in that we've seen this before. We saw it in, the 30s, the 60s, the 70s, the 87 crash, dot-com bust, the GFC. So we've seen markets collapse before. Yes, the trigger event is slightly different. It's slightly different each time. But we have ideas and strategies and ideas on how to deal with it. And the bottom line is that the market will tell you when to buy. And when that period is when it starts to trend up over the long term. And what people don't realise is that the money's not made on the turn. That's where people get churned up. The money's made a year or two post that. So there is plenty of time. And this is the thing people don't understand. There is always plenty of time. So the thing to note, this is the thing. If there is a key point about what's happening now, it is simply this. Take a deep breath and step back. Because one of the things people forget is that the market will be there tomorrow and the next day and the day after. I think what happens to people is they get caught in this strange little mental glitch where what happens is that they say, if I don't buy this particular share or thing right now at $1, by the end of the week it will have gone to $10 million and then they'll shut the market and I'll never be able to buy it again. And that's not the way the world works. There is this desperate need to react rather than think. Just take a deep breath, sit down and say, okay, what will convince me that now is a good time? And if I'm investing for the long term, well, it's not only going to be a good thing to do now, it'll be a good thing to do tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, because that's just the way these things work. And it's not that the door opens, you put your head in and it slams shut and never opens again.
Yeah, it's absolutely spot on, mate. So if we were to sum up the essence of your investment approach, can you sort of give us the fundamentals of that, mate?
Yeah, my approach is fairly simple, and I'll relate it to the situation we find ourselves in where markets let's talk about the domestic market, had been trying to meander their way up and then were hit by, this tidal wave of selling. I accept that event has occurred and that all my equity positions have been stopped out, now sitting in cash. The question becomes, what will tell me to go again? And it sounds simple, and to a degree it sounds a little bit facetious, and it's not meant to be. It's, the market will tell me, and it will tell me by prices going back up again. One of the worst things you can attempt to do is to try and catch a falling knife. Because what people don't understand is that prices can move far beyond what you think they can. People thought that Virgin might have been cheap at 50 cents. Well, it looks awfully expensive now as a dud and as a non-airline. So the market will tell me, and it will tell me that because it will start to trend back up over the long term. And once that occurs, that's my go signal. That's the signal that says to me, off you go again.
Yeah, spot on. It's the old story of you don't make it happen because we want to make it happen. We let it happen. We sit back. We read it, and then we follow a system and remove our heart and move our emotion along the way. Is that a fair summary, or what would you say to that?
And that's the thing. Get out of your own way. Take a deep breath. Pause, and you'll be okay. And that's, again, we come back to this sort of theme of the conversation. If people just take a pause and think about what they're doing, then it gives them time to make a decision. And it's a considered decision, not a reactive impulse decision. Impulse decisions very, very rarely work out for anyone.
Yeah, and it's because we're in this frantic world where there's a sense that if you're doing nothing, then you're doing nothing. Actually, having the balls really to actually say, well, I'm going to reflect here. I'm actually going to take some time to think about this and then take some informed action. Seems to be the missing link. Now that's awesome, mate. Yeah, go on.
No, I was just about to say, because I often operate under a presumption that the Japanese have a wonderful saying, and the saying is to take no action is an action. And I think people miss the subtlety in that. They think, well, you're not doing anything. No, I've chosen not to do anything, and that is my action. They get, again, as you said, they're caught up in this notion that if I'm not doing anything, then I'm not doing anything. Well, that's obvious, but that might be the course of action that you might have undertaken.
Yeah. Mate, what do you say to, and again, it'd be interesting your thoughts around this, because you sort of touched on this earlier on in the conversation around stockbrokers and brokers generally, and I think I've heard you say in past discussions that if you compare stockbrokers against the performance of the market through the averages and the indexes, they don't look very good. If we roll that into individuals in terms of picking stocks versus indexes and that style of approach, what's your view on all of that?
Okay, one of the biggest investment product in the world of the past 10 years has been these exchange-traded funds, which are basically in some way, shape or form an index fund. There are now more exchange-traded funds than there are actually listed shares in the world. They've become that popular and that stupid. There's probably an ETF for stocks that begin with the letter A and their name ends with the letter F. Someone will have sold that to someone somewhere. One of the things about index investing is a valid strategy within its context. And the context is it is not a buy and hold approach. I don't believe in buy and hold. For example, if you bought National Bank in the year 2000, you would have made approximately, as of this morning, no money. How's your buy and hold working out for you now? And this is one of the most profitable companies we have in Australia. Index trading in and of itself needs to be timed. There is a time to be in the market and a time not to be in the market. It's the same with all sort of vehicles. There's a time to be in the widget business and there's a time not to be in the widget business. And so it's a matter of working out how you're going to solve the problem for you. And for me, I solved the problem by I don't like to use the term stock picker because it seems to imply that you're a little bit like a monkey chucking poo at a copy of the Wall Street Journal and just picking things. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But mechanisms for doing that are very, very simple, but you need a plan. All of this is planned. Much of what goes around investing is given the currency or sort of imprimatur of, it's just people making it up as they go along. And that's the illusion they would like to give you, that it is this sort of macho yelling and screaming down the phone, just buying and selling things. It's not. Which is why we drag people towards the notion of, well, yes, you want to trade or you've been trading. Okay, here's a little quiz for you. Download our trading plan template and actually see if you can fill it in. See if you've actually got all the little bits and pieces that make up a trading plan, that make up a business plan. Because one of the things I notice about everybody who is successful is they do a few things well. One, they write lists. Nothing's ever made up. They keep a diary or a journal, and they serve slightly different functions. A diary keeps them on track as to what they're supposed to do during the day. A journal outlines their thoughts, ideas, notions about what they've done during the day. So they are slightly different. But they have a plan. This is the thing. Everything has a plan. And without the plan, it all just goes pear-shaped because you simply don't know what you're doing. When you fly anywhere and you park your bum in your seat and you look down the aisle and the cockpit door is open, the pilots haven't just suddenly rocked up and gone, where are we going? Shit, Bruce, I think we're going to Sydney. Do you know how to get there? Oh, here we go, the end of the runway, turn left, keep land on the left, ocean on the right. We'll bang into it. You'll see the big bridge. You'll be right. They're actually going through not only their flight plan, which they've actually gone through before they've gotten on the aeroplane, they're actually now going through the checklist for the aeroplane. They don't just stick the key in it, turn it over and give it a bit of welly and see what happens. So everything has a plan, and all successful people have plans. And so it doesn't matter what you encounter, you simply look to that section of the plan and go, okay, this has happened, I now do this. And it removes a lot of the horrible decision-making that people try to make under stress. And the moment you're under stress, your IQ drops by probably 50%.
Yeah, you're reminding me of that old analogy, talking about the plane exercise where, when's the right time to read the emergency list, when you're sitting on the tarmac having a cup of coffee while the hostess is talking to you about it, or when the plane's nose diving into the ocean.
When you're upside down at 30,000 feet going, there's something I should have paid attention to, isn't there?
Exactly right. Mate, one other question before I transition neatly into the old ambush tap dance series that I ask everyone that comes on the show. Because this is a question I often get, and it probably says more about that Australian psyche that you mentioned earlier on. And the question goes a bit like this, mate. If you're so successful in investing, why are you spending your time educating and training others? Why aren't you sitting on the beach in a hammock in the South Pacific sipping pina coladas? But what's your response to that? I'm sure people ask you that all the time.
Yeah, because I've actually done that. And I first retired before I was 40. Yeah. And retirement is a middle-class concept. And it was designed for the notion, I think, that people retired at 65, died at 67, because we had this old-fashioned notion of what work, what life, what everything else looked like. And I've actually done that, and to a degree, I actually blame Louise in that I'd probably quite happily be sitting on my ass on the couch, not doing much other than what I do, if it hadn't been for her insistence to get off my ass and off the couch and get out and actually do things and teach people things and show people things. Even with the businesses I run, it operates, well, it takes very, very little of my time. And the bottom line is, what the hell else are you going to do with your time? Once you've been everywhere and seen everything, the only thing that is left is the connection you make with others and the impact you make on their lives, because all the rest are external things. they're the notion, and my definition of wealthy is someone who's wealthy is someone who buys experiences or who has experiences. Rich is you buy things. And so I've had the experiences I want. There are some more I want to have, and unfortunately our current restrictions on travel have put the kibosh on that. But if you have no connection with others, then you've really got a fairly barren existence.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but I get a lot of satisfaction out of just helping others and seeing the light bulb go on. I can't define it. It's not that tangible, but I end up with a big smile on my face just doing it, mate. So,
and that's the thing. It's not tangible. When I have students of mine email me from, God knows where in the world, saying, "Just sitting here with my laptop trading," you go, friggin' sensational.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, no, I love that, mate. Mate, let's transition to the good old bushfire lightning round, mate. And these are just the 5 quick questions that the audience always want to sort of glean your words of wisdom. And you've mentioned a couple of crackers already, but what's your favourite quote and why?
I've actually got 2, and they sort of merge together. And they're not actually quotes so much as homilies. The first is, "It is what it is," and the second is, "This too shall pass." And my Jewish friends would often quote these to me. And I like them simply because the first one dictates that it is what it is. This is the reality of the moment. You accept the moment. And the notion that it will pass is also true, because all things pass. One of the things that I've noticed in life is that when you run into hurdles, bumps, whatever, there is a tendency to perceive that they are forever. You need to accept that they're like seasons. It's a little bit like we've had with COVID-19 and people's inability to friggin' stay inside, because we're now a bunch of self-obsessed narcissists who think we're being impinged upon by not getting a fatal virus and dying. It will pass. It is a season. And those 2 things, you just accept what it is and you accept that it will pass. And you simply do what you do with it when you're there.
Yeah, spot on. Absolutely spot on. Mate, returning to the sort of literary field for a minute, what's the top book that you'd recommend people read and why?
This is a bit of an obscure one. It's actually Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who was in, I cannot remember which one of the death camps.
4 of them. He was actually in 4, mate. He started in Auschwitz, and then he actually moved across to Dachau. So, bloody awesome read. Awesome read.
Yeah, simply because I have no time for self-help books. I have no time for people like Anthony Robbins, whose only claim to fame is he's got twice as many teeth in that big yank head of his than any normal person should have. And, he's the sort of bloke I'd really like to walk across the road and just slap. It's simply because Frankl's book is so immensely powerful, and it supersedes every other self-help book in the world, because it's not really a self-help book.
No,
it is just...
it is a cracker.
It's sensational.
Yeah, I've just reread it, because every time we go through stuff like this, I want to remind myself just how good we've got it. And that is the best book to read. If you want a leveller to get a perspective around how good things are, despite how everyone says how bad things are, read that book, because it really smacks you in the face as to just what he went through and thousands of others, and the insights that he took from that, and what people can survive through. 4 years of, it's a miracle that he actually walked away from it. If you compare that to what we've got it on toast.
Look, and he not only walked away from it, he walked away from it being able to make a contribution to others, which is a remarkable thing. And this is the thing that always amazes me about people who come out of these situations, is that not only do they survive, but they survive, they come out the other side, and they make a contribution to others. You would think that their psyche, their soul, their heart would be so battered by events that there'd be nothing left. But it doesn't seem to be that way.
It's almost more a catalyst for them to, and a motivator them to do exactly that. Yeah, and I love that. Mate, changing gears a little bit, a favourite topic for a lot of Australians is that, they feel they pay too much tax. What's the top legal thing that you've done to minimise the tax that you pay?
I actually took a leaf out. One of the things, I've got a few things that have stuck with me over the years. And again, this is one of these things that only people of a certain vintage will remember. There used to be a daytime TV show hosted by a guy called Mike Walsh, who was actually a pharmacist by training, but ended up being exceptionally wealthy because he bought theatres, he was involved in business, he owned the production company to his TV show. And he said two things. One's not related to this at all, but I'll mention it anyway. He said, if you're one of these people who keeps long hours, and you have to when you're just starting off, and you come in late at night, do not have a clock where you can see it. Because if you do, it will set off a train inside your brain that says, shit, I've only just gotten in at 1:30, I've got to be up at 6, that means I'm only going to get, oh dear God, I'm going to get no sleep. And so you pre-program yourself. But he also said, do not be the smartest person in the room. One of the many people to say that. And so the smartest thing I've ever done with tax is to outsource that to others and say, here's what I do. I'm going to pay you money. You now go away and do what you do. And at the end of every financial year, when I sit down with the accountants and they sit there and they open up the accounts and they start at the first page and I go, stop, I'm not interested. Let's go to the last page. How much? When? Is that the best you can do? If you say yes to is that the best you can do, then we're good to go. Find other people. Don't do it yourself. That's stupid. If you tore your ACL, you wouldn't give yourself your own knee reconstruction, would you? If you're involved in business, sooner or later you're going to have to surround yourself with people who know things, and they act as a shield. Because now when things happen in business, I just pick up the phone, I ring somebody and say, I have this problem, I would like you to fix it, and they go, yes.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, the problem's now solved.
Yeah, I love that, mate. It's, I often say you need to become a manager of your own team, and all you need to do is manage the manager. Because if you wanted life-threatening brain surgery, you wouldn't go to Bunnings, get a drill, some methylated spirits and some cotton wool and try and do it in front of the mirror in the bathroom.
Had a bit of a crack.
No, that's awesome, mate. Let's come back to our favourite topic, and that's the investment piece. What's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received?
Look, I don't want to. I think, unfortunately, there's a misunderstanding around the role of education and wealth, in that you get a lot of these people saying, "Oh, left school at 14 and built my business, yada yada yada. Why are you going to university?" Well, let me hit you with this unfortunate fact. Of BRW's Rich 200, 75% of them have university degrees. And strangely enough, the proportion of those that are engineers or software engineers is growing. If for no other mechanism than learning how to think, education is a powerful thing. And there is this unfortunate link between average income, average lifespan, health, marital status, and education. And so it is simultaneously the best and worst advice you can give somebody. And this is the paradox of it. Getting education is the best advice, but getting people caught in the education system is the worst advice. And the worst advice you can get is off careers guidance counsellors within the education system. So you're caught in a paradox that getting an education is really good, but being stuck and cloistered and constrained by the system is really bad. And I'm quite certain you and I could talk for hours about the failings of the education system in teaching people about their own psychology, how they deal with people, how they deal with money. Why do you think that way? Why do you think money is that? Why do you think money is this? And so it's an awful paradox. Yeah. So at once, education is the best and worst of things you can actually do, and the best and worst of all advice.
Yeah, and I love your point there, and it's a theme that's run through our discussion today. Education's great when it's encouraging you to be creative and to solve problems. Where it falls down is where it thrashes that out of you and you become compliant and conform. Yes. So that's where I reckon you're spot on. It's the two-edged sword that you're talking about there. So no, that's awesome, mate. Let's turn to your own habits and disciplines then. What's a personal habit that you believe contributes most to your investment success today?
Probably unyielding discipline. And I think, I'm not certain whether self-discipline is something that can be taught. For example, I trade overnight markets. Now that suits me to some degree because I've always been an early riser. And I was an early riser for swimming training, for team training, for whatever. It just suits me. The unfortunate thing is I had many people approach me and say, I'd like to trade overnight markets. And I say, well, that's cool, but you're going to have to be up by 5. Oh, I can't do it at 9? No, you can't. You're going to be up at 5. Oh, what about if I do it in the evening? I don't do much in the evening. I know something on Netflix. Oh, yeah, maybe the afternoon would be good. No, to be successful in anything requires discipline, and it requires becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. For example, I train, and I train almost every day in some way, shape or form. I don't look forward to it every day. People think you wake up in the morning going, brilliant, it'll be 4 degrees in the gym and it's pissing with rain and I haven't slept very well. Let's go flog our bodies. No, you think, oh, God, all right, okay. Where are my bloody shoes? All right, found my shoes, all right. God, it's cold. All right, let's keep going. But that is the notion of all things, that they are all like this. Everything that is worth having is difficult at some point in time. And again, we come back to being a clown. You just have to pick yourself up and go, I'm going to do this. And there is again, I'm not a big one for self-help books, but there is a guy going around who's, oh God, what's his name? I think it's Dave Goggins, former Navy SEAL, former Army Ranger. Yeah. Who failed SEAL training 3 times, I think. And he has a book called Can't Hurt Me. And he has a statement that I do sort of agree with, and it says that when you're doing something physical, when your brain is ready to give up, you've probably got 40% left in the tank. Your brain's just opting for that minimum energy state that has kept humans alive for eons. And I think people do that in their day-to-day life, that they move towards a minimum energy state. It is, how can I expend the least amount? Well, unfortunately, when you do what we do, you've got to expend more than the least amount, and you've got to be uncomfortable at times.
Yeah, beautifully summed up there, mate. And it's I'm interested that you'd say that discipline is something you've either got or haven't. And what I've found over the years that those who don't have the self-discipline create the discipline by making themselves accountable to someone else. That's the way they can overcome that. Yeah. Have you got any other thoughts around that?
That's a very, very powerful point. In our mentor program, we run accountability groups. It's simply because it forces people to be accountable to someone else. They say, by this date, I will have done this. And if they haven't, then they're accountable to a group that says, well, you said you were going to do this. What happened? Where did it fall down? And an accountability buddy is an enormously powerful ally. Everyone needs an unreasonable friend. But my view of being a friend is it's not my job to blow smoke up your ass and tell you that everything you do is brilliant. It's my job to say, look, mate, you're a dickhead. Stop. And these are the reasons why I think that. So it's not just me making a reactive statement. And so unreasonable friends are immensely powerful allies. They might not seem like it at times, but they actually are.
Unreasonable friends. I haven't heard that expression before, mate. That's a really good way to coin that expression, mate. Awesome, mate. Final question, and this is one that I've just sort of started asking people of recent, and I guess again, given what's happening in the world at the moment, because we're pretty much all on the same boat. If I gave you a microphone that spoke to every single one of the 7.7 billion people in the world, and I gave you 1 minute to talk, what would you say?
Depends upon the situation. If we're talking about something like COVID-19, I would relate back to my simple statement that will pass. It is... Time's arrow flies in only one direction. You can't ever rewind the clock and say, you can say, I wish I'd done that, wish I'd done this, but there's no way of physically enacting it. We're all caught in this moment together, and we're all caught in this season together. So there's nothing we can do about that other than grind our way through. Now, I know people say make the best of it, blah, 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 but I'm quite certain the people who say make the best of it, blah, 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 are the same sort of wanker celebrities who sit in their $50 million mansions and tell people how hard they're having it. I would imagine if you're stuck in a housing commission flat with 2 teenage boys, that it's much harder for you. And so it is a matter of grinding. And when you grind, it's a matter of chunking the information. One of the problems people have is they set themselves these enormous dreams and they think, how am I ever going to do that? And they fall over at the sight of it because it is simply too much. The thing to do is to break it into blocks. What can I do in the next minute? What can I do in the next 5 minutes? What can I do in the next 10? It's simply a matter of you break things down. Things become smaller and more manageable. I have a friend who runs marathons. Why the God anyone would do that is beyond me. I get tired driving 40-odd Ks.
Mate, I've never seen a happy marathon runner. Have you?
God, no. And I would like to point out that the first person to run a marathon, Phidippides, who informed the Greeks of their victory at the Plains of Marathon, actually dropped dead. And that there is a form of cardiomyopathy called Phidippides cardiomyopathy that you see in endurance athletes. So they actually damage their own hearts. But he said when it gets really, really hard, the thing you do is, what's the next step? What's the next step? Okay, I can see a tree. I'll run to the tree. All right, I've made it to the tree. Oh, there's a wheelie bin. I'll run to the wheelie bin. And so instead of it being this immensely overwhelming task, it becomes a series of small tasks that are manageable, that when they're compounded together actually become a large task accomplished.
Yeah, that's eating the elephant in mouthfuls. Yeah, I love that, mate. That's the next step. That's a really good analogy. Mate, been a awesome conversation. I reckon we've only just scratched the surface, so if you're open to it, would love to get you back at some stage and delve into some of those subjects in more detail. It's been both enjoyable and informative, but I can't take the smile off my face, Chris. Mate, for those who... Sorry, mate?
No, I was going to say, it's been fun and we can do it again any time because none of us are going anywhere in the short term.
Dead right. Mate, for those who, like myself, have a real and growing interest in what you do and how you help people, how do they get in touch with you and what's the next step for them? Okay.
Probably next step, and I mentioned this during our little chat, is we have an e-course that people can download, and we also have a trading plan template that they can download and actually fill in. So if people go to tradinggame.com.au, they'll see the link on our homepage. That would be their best part, their sort of best starting point.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great way for them to start to recognise where they're at and what sort of help they need, which would be a great brief for you to take them on that journey. Mate, awesome. It's been very enjoyable, Chris. As I say, you've been one of my virtual mentors for a long, long time, but you never knew it. And I'd really encourage the listeners to reach out because I've always been a believer it's not one style of investment or the other, it's a combination of all of the above. And if you're looking into the equities space, if you want no nonsense, no bullshit, systematic advice that comes back to fundamentals, not to flavours or trends. No one better than yourself and Louise to do that. So thanks again, mate, and looking forward to staying in touch.
Thank you.
Cheers, Chris.
Well, freedom fighters, how good was that? To get a summary of all this investment gold in the show notes, just email me on hello@khgroup.com.au. That's hello@khgroup.com.au. Or check us out at www.bushymartin.com.au/get invested. I look forward to joining you next week for another episode of the Get Invested podcast. So thanks for listening, and as always, dream as if you'll live forever and live as if you'll die